I'd like to welcome everyone to this panel of the 2020 Ring of Fire Convention. This one is titled The Amazing Stone Family. And the reason for the title is that characters who have come to figure very prominently throughout the 1632 series, and by now in many novels and stories, are the Stone family, which consists of four people. Tom Stone, the father, and his three sons, although not all of them are his natural sons, Frank, Ron, and Jerry. The Stone family got launched by Mercedes Lackey when I asked Misty to write a short story for the first of the anthologies of short fiction that we did connected us to the 1632 series, which was titled Ring of Fire. And Misty wrote a story called To Die For. It's not long, it's about 6,000 words. And she's the one who introduced the family. And the Stone family are oddballs. They are what is left of a hippie commune that was launched in that part of northern West Virginia in the late 70s, went through the 80s, started disintegrating. And what's left is Tom Stone, who is by then a man somewhere in his, I'd say, the middle son is Ron, and it is unclear whether Tom is actually his father or not biologically. And the youngest son is Jerry, and it is clear that he is not. Nobody in the family cares, neither Tom nor his three sons. But that is the origins of the family. It was a hippie commune that practiced relaxed sexual mores, we'll call them, and so that's the reason for the provenance of the three sons. By the way, I should mention that Frank, Ron, and Jerry are not their real names. Their real names are Faramir, Elron, and Guahir. But they have all sort of dropped those names because going to school in a high school in West Virginia with names like that is going to bring all kinds of grief down on you. So everybody just forgets their original given names. Anyway, Misty wrote this story, and I had no idea what she was going to write. She just sent me the story, and I read it, and I was completely charmed by it. And the story is of these hardscrabble hippies on this very hardscrabble rundown commune. They live in a geodesic dome, which they built some time ago. They didn't build it. It was built by the commune back in the origins. And they sort of eke out a living. Tom raises and grows quite good marijuana, which he sort of sells, but he doesn't sell in the area. He sells it out so the police don't bother him. And that's who they are when the Ring of Fire happens. And all of a sudden, as part of Granville, they find themselves plunged into the early 17th century. And where the story begins is that Tom has fallen in love with a German woman named Magdalena, who is quite a bit younger than he is. She's in about 30. And unfortunately, her father is a very prosperous local tradesman. And he does not approve of Tom because basically he's broke. And that's how the story starts. And what happens in the story, the title of which is To Die For, is that Tom figures out he can use the various chemical knowledge he has, which he picked up partly through school and partly through making drugs, to start turning out dyes which are unseen at this stage in history in the 17th century. And very quickly, he starts becoming wealthy, he and the whole family. And therefore, at that point, this is the end of the story, the father of the lady is reconciled to the marriage, and the marriage happens. Anyway, that's Misty's story. And like I said, I was completely charmed by it when she wrote it. And we published it in the first Ring of Fire anthology. But by then, by the time that first anthology came out, this family had started again.
All right. Misty, why
Well,
don't you pick up?
all
Give us
right.
your story.
Basically, Tom is went to school to be a pharmacist, and I happened to go to Purdue University, and one of my roommates was a pharmacy student, so I knew what their education was. And back in the day, I don't know if this is still true. Back in the day, pharmacy students at Purdue were taught to be compounding pharmacists. That is, they could, if they had to, make everything from scratch or almost everything from scratch. So I had noticed that there was a gap in the knowledge in the setting, that although they had a doctor, doctors are not taught how to make drugs. It's not part of the medical education, because you'd have to go through another whole 8 years of training to learn how to do that sort of thing. So once the drugs in the various pharmaceutical drugs in the town ran out, there wasn't going to be any new supply of anything. So I thought I'd fill in that gap with Tom, who does know how to make proper medical drugs from almost scratch. Uh, the apparatus is not a problem. There were glass blowers there back then, good glass blowers, I might add. Uh, he's got a way to heat things to proper temperatures. He's got a way to do column distillation, so he could make proper medicines for the town once he knew what was needed. But of course, that now becomes a manufacturing process, because now he can sell it out to greater Europe. So that's it's not just that he started out with the dyes, the aniline dyes that come from coal tar, um, which there is an abundance down there, since they still have the coal mine. But once he got the aniline dyes as a basis for his new fortune, he could then go on to compound things. And I believe the first thing we had him do was aspirin.
Yes.
So the first
Yes.
thing we had him do was proper aspirin, not just willow bark tea, which varies in quality and consistency.
And tastes
Yeah.
gothic.
And oh God, it tastes terrible.
By the way, can you see me or hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, good. I don't know why I dropped that again. I just logged back in. All I can do.
I just picked up where you left off.
Yeah, no, I got it. Thank you very much. I just to pick up just briefly on the last point Misty was saying. One of the other storylines that is spun off, which we have a different panel on, which is Dr.
Well, I'll pick that one up since I'm working with Karen, Dr. Gribbleflotz. And currently, Karen Offord's book has Tom Stone and Philip Gribbleflotz together in northern Italy, having both adventures and learning rather reluctantly to respect one another's competence in the fields in which they work. Because Dr. Gribbleflotz may be peculiar and have an odd sense of clothing style, but he is a fully trained essayist and alchemist through the Fugger system. So he does know what he's doing. So we brought those two together. Karen has Tom Stone and Philip Gribbleflotz, to the point that there will be a little surprise name at the end of the next book that Karen has done.
As long as it's not bear, I don't care.
Oh, no. If it will probably, I don't know if I should say it or not, but Magdalena finally produces a child,
Oh, yay!
whom they name Philippa.
Oh, it's
Yes,
a girl?
it's a girl.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mhm. Yes,
Tom's always wanted a daughter.
yes, and it's not as if he really needs more sons. He has
No,
an
he has more than enough sons to hold him for a while. Given that the sons tend to go off on hair-raising adventures that of the sort that no parent really welcomes.
Well, they're boys, it happens.
Yes. But probably, Andrew, you should pick up now because you took the stones
I
after.
took them to Venice, yes, as part of the trading and diplomatic mission to establish ties with the most serene Republic of Venice. And Eric said that we should have the stones along. Largely, it has to be said to set up what then subsequently happened, but also because we wanted a bigger role for this family. So I found myself wondering, well, what happens when you take the kind of chap who's smart enough to survive off the grid as the last holdout of a hippie commune, and put him in charge of an international trade delegation? And
Now
so I'm going to say,
that would be one of the sons, right?
well, it was Tom was the original ambassador. Well,
Okay.
because at this point the sons are teenage boys and not really fit to be trusted with anything more consequential than string. By speaking as having been a teenage boy. Yeah. That said, it didn't get any better as I got older, going out on midnight fishing expeditions and such. But and then figuring out a method of what do three, as Eric instructed me to make them rambunctious teenage boys, what do they get up to when they are thrown in the middle of all of this high drama and politics and commerce? But meanwhile, the local committee of correspondence is trying to get things done. I like to think I had a little fun with that.
That was a. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, that was what they wind up getting involved in. Is the oldest Frank falls in love with Giovanna, who is the daughter of an Italian radical who is not exactly playing with. He's got a few screws loose. Let's put it that way. In fact, the whole family does. So they get in a whole series of adventures. They wind up down in Rome, where they get involved in a plot to assassinate the Pope, which they get inadvertently drawn into. I'm not going to give away the plot for those who haven't read this book. It's really a very entertaining book, if I say so myself. Andrew and I did a good job with it. But the central figure in the Stone family, the two central figures in that book, 1634 to Galileo Affair, are Tom Stone, but mostly his oldest son, Frank, is sort of probably the single most prominent character in the book. And they have all sorts of adventures, at the end of which Frank winds up married to Giovanna. And the boys manage to get themselves out of a real serious jam, partly because they sort of saved the day at the very end, and partly also because of the clever legal mind of Mazarini, as he was then, who later became Cardinal Mazarin French, who was then a young diplomat, and he figured that. Anyway, this is really a good book. It focuses.
It seems somebody doesn't want Eric's voice to be heard.
Yes, he must be having connectivity problems on the
Yeah.
system rather than here. Well, anyway, having gotten them there, this was the point at which Andrew kindly let me work with them for a while. We talk about collaborative writing in the 1632 universe, and the Stone family is an example of it because several of us have used the family. Frank and Giovanna basically have remained in Italy and remained with that thread. The two younger boys, Ron and Jerry, came back to the USC with Tom Stone, and I did various things with both of them. I married Ron off to a paragon of middle class respectability and turned him into a businessman, at which point Eric took him back and he's using him again. Yes.
You could call it a football game, couldn't you?
Well,
Eric has a tendency to swipe the characters I developed, which is his right.
I plunder them is probably a more accurate way of putting it, but I do give a lot of them back. We've traded Ron. Well, we traded Ron back and forth for a bit, and Jerry has pretty much, although Andrew and I did borrow him for Galileo Fair, but Jerry has been more Virginia's character than any other, and I would actually like her to talk some about what her plans are in the future. But what happened with Ron is he develops this romance with Missy Jenkins, who is really a very attractive character. You know, she's the closest you can get to a princess of a small town in West Virginia. I mean, you know, her family is very much the issestablishment of the town, and her grandmothers in particular do not approve of her marriage to this
Hippie kid.
this scruffy. Except the problem they all have is that by now the Stone family is richer than anybody else in Granville by a country mile.
Well, they would be.
Yeah, they've grown extraordinarily wealthy.
You're talking. You're talking the two of the most easily portable, hence cutting down on shipping costs, and economically desirable sorts of things that you can manufacture, which is dye and pharmaceuticals. They both take up a very tiny space, so your shipping costs are negligible. They're easy to ship. You can send them on horseback if you really need to. And pound for pound, they're worth way more than gold. So yeah, they're going to be filthy rich.
The thing is, I'm sorry, I'm dropping in and out. I don't know why the connection's the way it is, but we'll live with it. The thing that turns out is that Ron Stone has a very kind of pragmatic, unflappable temperament, and he doesn't really care about money. So this actually makes him an extremely good businessman.
Right.
Because he takes a just very calm, practical, matter-of-fact thing. And so he winds up, even though he's only 21 or 22, he actually winds up being the one who runs the business. And then what then happens, though, is I moved him out of Granville because he can't stand his well, he's not his father-in-law, he's his father's father-in-law, the German fellow who's actually running the dye works. And he's honest and he's very capable, but he's a pain in the butt. And so basically Ron wants to get the pharmaceutical business away from him because they don't want to run that on the same basis they run the dye works.
And so in the event,
an adventure I then put him in, which is called Scarface, which is a short novel that was published in Ring of Fire 4, they wind up on their way over to Lorraine, where they're going to get involved in various things. Along the way, his wife Missy gets sort of kidnapped, and anyway, Harry Lefferts, who is a character who's been in the series from the very first book, winds up saving him. And that's a whole nother story of its own. But that's where Ron has wound up with Missy, is in Lorraine, and they're going to stay there for a while, and that will intersect with what Virginia is going to be doing with the youngest son, Jerry. In the meantime, Frank is kind of, he and Giovanna, his wife, figure very prominently in the canon law, which Andrew and I wrote together, where they wind up at the end being arrested and put in prison by the Spanish Cardinal Borgia, who has carried out a coup d'etat and has seized power, and he's now the new pope. And in the next book, in which they figure the papal stakes, which I wrote with Chuck Gannon, they get rescued. So they're very important to the plot, but they don't figure very much as characters. They're mostly a plot device. That's the last we've seen of Frank. And I haven't decided yet what exactly is going to happen with him and Giovanna. They have a young baby now, a child, so they've got other things they have to deal with for the moment. Tom, meanwhile, has decided he really enjoys staying in Padua and teaching medicine, so he doesn't have to deal with the business at all. Which means that Ron is now the one running pretty much the whole business. So you got this 21, maybe 22-year-old hippie kid who is running what is in many ways the most important chemical dye works and pharmaceutical company in the world. We have a lot of fun with the Stone family. I mean, they have really, like I said, I don't know what the antonym of the word metastasize is, because you don't want to use that. That's negative. But that family has kind of done that. Blossomed throughout the series. And it tends to drive a lot of other people crazy.
I never, ever envisioned that when I came up with them.
I know.
I just thought, hey, here is a very important niche that has not been filled that can certainly help us not just cement Grantville's importance to the 1600s, but can bring in a lot of money to Grantville, and also keep the citizens of Grantville more or less as healthy as they would have been in the 20th century. I mean, if it comes down to it, buried in his old library from his pharmaceutical studies days, Tom could probably even come up with chemotherapy drugs.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I think so. They're not that difficult to formulate. They're finicky, but they're not that difficult to formulate. And the knowledge of what drugs to apply to what cancer is certainly well established in his pharmaceutical books.
Would it be? I had to go on chemo 3 years ago, and I developed lymphoma, which fortunately the chemo worked and it cleared it away. But I remember talking to my oncologist and one of my oncologists, and he said, "Well," he said, "you're lucky that you're having to go through this now, because 20 years ago we only had 4 drugs that worked, and the problem was we didn't know which ones of them were doing exactly what. So everybody got all 4, and that was why chemo was so brutal. Whereas I got to say, my experience with it wasn't that bad at all. It's not a lot of fun.
Well, but the thing is that Tom doesn't have modern medical knowledge to know what those 4 chemo drugs are good for, but your doctor does. He can make the drugs, and your doctor knows which ones are effective for what.
Would he know by the year 2000? Because don't forget, the time travel event happens in the year 2000. So I'm wondering what he would know by then.
I would doubt that. My daughter went through chemo when she was in grad school because she had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was almost 20 years ago now. And was basically what Eric was saying. At that time, they just threw everything at them. Even the oncologist down at Virginia Tech, who dealt with it all the time because it's a disease of young adults. They cured her. I mean, they sent her into remission, but it's not going to be equivalent to what they do today.
Okay.
Yeah,
but
no, I don't think it will be, because you got to always remember.
possible. But it's still
Yeah.
it's still a viable option.
Oh
Which-
yeah, no,
which
if they can get them,
if you have the option between being sick as a dog and dying, you're going to take the sick as a dog
sure.
option.
oh yeah, no question about it. I hadn't realized they could even do it at all. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm sure there's stories in there somewhere. In any event,
Miracle Max. Miracle Max's
Huh?
miracle pill.
No rush, you know, you get a rotten miracle.
I have to say that, by the way, just to back up a sec to where the first time I got cut off, the Ring of Fire anthology that had Misty's story that introduced this family didn't come out. It wasn't published until April of, no, it came out in January of 2004. And by the time it came out, the first novel, 1633, had come out, in which the Stone family figures. And just 3 months after the anthology came out, the Galileo Affair, which I wrote with Andrew, came out, in which they're major characters. So it took a while for your story to see the light of day, because we were putting together an anthology, which took a lot longer to put together than novels written by authors that, you know, one or two of us. But your characters had already spread even before your story came out, because Andrew and my novel didn't get published till after your story, but it had been written before it came out. That's how I love that story. And the thing about those characters is they are so delightful to work with. And it's all four of us, not just Tom, all three of the kids. They're very attractive, first of all. They're nice kids. They really are. But they're also clearly not the kind of kids who are going to worry too much about whether they, I don't know how to put it, they're not going to care a whole lot about social.
They're not going to care about social mores. They're going to play well with others, but not necessarily care a whole lot about the rules.
Exactly, which is exactly what they do in the novel Andrew and I wrote. God, we had fun with that book. That was a very enjoyable novel to write. Listen, we're going to. I don't want to. I want to make sure we don't run out of time before this. Virginia, I'd like you to talk some about what you're going to be doing without trying to give away anything plot-wise, but to talk about what you have in mind for Jerry Stone, the youngest of the brothers.
All right. Well, I picked Jerry Stone up right after the first attempt to assassinate Urban VIII. And at that point, he's a young teenager and has experienced seeing a man's head blown to pieces right because he had to do it. At this juncture, either we could have had him go on doing, not responding to this, or we could have him experience some kind of stress syndrome. What I did was have him come back. The person who manages to reach him is the Lutheran district superintendent under Count Ludwig Günther over at Rudolstadt. And the 14-year-old Jerry decides that he's had a sign from heaven, a lightning strike, and he's going to become a Lutheran pastor. This actually let me do something, namely let him grow up, and at the same time acquire an an education which will be regarded as at least minimally adequate by prominent downtimers. Because in pursuit of this, he gets his father to send him to the Latin school over at Rudolstadt and then to the University of Jena, where he has been having a frustrating time because the other members of his family keep calling him away from the university, which luckily in the early modern period does not have a rigid semester structure the way modern ones do. To do this, you need to come to Prague. No, you need to go to Besançon. You need to do this, you need to go that. But I've gotten him at least to the age of 19 now with a basic downtime education. I had him appear in a couple of the books. He showed up in Legions of Pestilence in Burgundy to be the face of the smallpox vaccination campaign that didn't work the first time around. He went off to Paris with Ruvigny and Bismarck to retrieve Rohan's wife and daughter, where I had quite a lot of fun with him when he came up with the plot and music for a derivative extravaganza on the play by thinking of every bad science fiction or fantasy novel he had ever read and pushing them all into one.
Did he have sparkly vampires?
No, this is 2000. He's not doing sparkly vampires, but he is doing basically Shannara or Eddings.
Oh, you God.
Know. It's for the French court.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah. But anyway, by the end of Trouble with Huguenots, he says, I'm finally going to get back and get a whole year of study in. And I've put in one sentence. It's only one sentence, but it's not a throwaway. It's August von Bismarck looks at him and says, Jerry, are you sure you're doing this for the right reason? It doesn't seem to me that this is very Lutheran at all. You're trying to earn your way into heaven with good works, not relying on faith and grace. Now, this poor little earworm is going to work through his head for quite a while. And we are going to find Jerry concluding that, in fact, yes, actually, he is doing this for the wrong reason. And he's just finishing up his arts degree. He hasn't started theology yet. So he is going to be shunted off.
You're turning him into Andrew Lloyd Webber, aren't you?
No, I'm not. Because the people he went on these adventures through France with, Ruvigny and Bismarck, in addition to being military officers in the service, in the 17th century, there really was no difference between being military and civilian when you were serving a ruler. You got pushed back and forth from them. And these two are as much diplomats as they are military officers for Bernhard. And through them and through what Ron is doing in Lorraine and the co-protectorate of the Spanish Netherlands and Burgundy over Lorraine, because Eric very early in this whole thing said, Lotharingia will rise again. And I have had to figure out very elaborate ways in which I could get Lotharingia to rise again and make a buffer state between the USA and France, which I think I've done fairly cleverly, but it's involved some thinking. But because they have been up to the Netherlands before, we are going to find, and this won't really indicate the plot, but Ruvigny and Bismarck will end up being sent up to the Spanish Netherlands again. Jerry will be back in Besançon because he's been back and forth from Besançon about 6 times. and he'll go up and he will fall into the orbit of Peter Paul Rubens.
Oh.
That's where he's going.
Rubens is
better.
actually
That's much better than Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Rubens has actually figured pretty prominently in the series since 1634, the Baltic War, where he was, as he was in real history, he was a major diplomat as well as a famous artist. And he winds up serving in the court of the reunited Netherlands, which has a Catholic king that has established freedom of religion. So he was basically able to cut a deal with the Prince of Orange to reunite the Netherlands without triggering off another continued round of war between Spain and the Dutch. But so Rubens has been a top diplomat for, as he calls himself, King Fernando, the king in the Netherlands. He's trying not to get his older brother, the King of Spain, too mad at him. So Rubens has been around for quite a while, and I worked with him a lot with David Weber in 1634, the Baltic War, and he's figured off and on a lot since then. So, I mean, I know I've used him off and on in several different stories. He's never the central character, but he's an important secondary character. One thing about this time period is it's kind of thin for musicians, but it's a great time period for other artists. And you just run into Rembrandt's a young man at this point. Rubens is very well established by now, so that's part of it. But anyway, when Virginia told me that, I was relieved, because when she developed Jerry into a aspiring Lutheran pastor, the logic made perfect sense given where Andrew and I left things at the end of Galileo Affair, because Jerry had been through this is a kind of experience for someone as young as he would have either had to traumatize him or you'd have to worry about him if it hadn't. And Virginia's solution was kind of a genius, but at the same time, I'm sitting there looking toward future novels and trying to think, how are we going to write adventures
with a Lutheran pastor
about a damn Lutheran? I mean, you could do. Virginia, in fact, has written, and we're about to Ringfire Press is about to publish a book. It's called "Things Could Be Worse." The central figure, which is a Lutheran pastor named Kastenmeier, but they're really enjoyable stories, but they're not adventure stories.
Well, this is not Japanese anime. We do not have fighting nuns swinging the size of Mount Olympus. No.
Yeah, no.
And we are the poorer for it.
So anyway,
that's not stretching. That's not suspending disbelief, Andrew. That is hanging disbelief by the neck until dead.
Yeah, true. Anyway, I talked to Virginia just a few days earlier in preparation for this panel, and I asked her. I said, because Jerry has been I haven't worked that much with Jerry. He's one of the brothers I haven't really ever worked that much with, although he does appear for a while briefly in Scarface. But I asked her in preparation for this panel, are you planning on doing anything with Jerry? And she started explaining all this to me. And I remember thinking, oh, great, he won't be a Lutheran pastor after all that. Because if you remember Jerry in Galileo Affair, he was the scapegrace of the bunch. He was the one who was, setting off the stink bombs and the one they would always turn to when they had to figure out dirty tricks. And the idea of him being stuck forever as a Lutheran pastor was distressing. Anyway, so I was very happy when she developed that. I don't know where we're going to go in the future with the Stone family. The only thing I do know is that they will continue to figure in the series, because they're just all the four of them in different ways. And it's not just the four of them. I mean, Ron Stone's wife, Missy, is a delightful character in her own right, and she's having her own adventures. She actually has more adventures than he does in Scarface. And Frank and Giovanna, when I figure out what exactly I'm going to be doing in Italy, I haven't figured that out yet. That's Chuck Gannon and I concluded to a degree the Italian line of the story that I began with Andrew in Galileo Fair, and we concluded it at the end with the Vatican sanction, which is where the Pope Urban, whom Andrew and I had rescued, sadly comes to a bad end at the hands of the wicked Cardinal Borgia. But proving once again, be careful what you wish for, you may get it. The new Pope who's going to replace Urban is the same Cardinal Bedmar, whom Andrew and I introduced in Galileo Fair. And Cardinal Bedmar, I attempted to title the book in which he figures 1637, Bring Me the Head of Cardinal Borgia or something like that. I mean, Bedmar is himself Spanish, and he doesn't, he's cosmopolitan, but he doesn't have any trouble with carrying out a vendetta. So, but however, that sort of storyline that Andrew and I began, and that Frank Stone figures so prominently in, it's sort of come to an end, and now it's going to open up into what, in my crankier moments, I'm calling the Tyrrhenian line, except then I have to explain to people what the Tyrrhenian Sea is, but it'll probably just be the Western Med line. It's going to broaden out. And okay, thanks. And so I don't know exactly what will happen with Frank. I've got to chew on it. And part of the problem is the Italian political situation right now, the way we've turned it into with Cardinal Borgia having carried out this very bloody coup d'etat in Rome. I can't just very well drop Frank and Giovanna and their baby into most of Italy being radicals, because they won't survive for very long. So I've got to think about it. So I don't know what's going to happen with them. But Ron Stone and Missy and Jerry Stone are all going to be entangled in these constant turmoil that's going on up and down what I think of as the Rhineland. It's not really the Rhineland; it's actually west of there, but it's sort of the borderlands between Germany and France.
It's the Alsace-Lorraine area, which was, that was a hugely developed area for manufacturing later on in about the 1700s. It started to become a center for manufacturing, because it's just perfect insofar as you've got everything that you need to make anything and ship anything.
Yeah.
That's why it was so fought over, both in World War I and World War II. Everybody wanted it.
Well,
But at the moment, that just Nicole has it. And they are going that the dumpy, stubborn little Duchess Nicole is more stubborn than anyone except her siblings knew.
I haven't also figured out what I want to do with Tom Stone. To be honest, after Galileo Affair, where he was very prominent, played an active role in, he sort of faded back into the background, and his sons came to the fore in later books. And what we did with Tom was essentially perch him in Padua, where he's teaching at the university, and he and Magdalena. Virginia, remind me, when does the child arrive, or has the child arrived? I've forgotten.
The child will arrive, has arrived depending on which book one is reading. I believe it's April 1637.
All right, so we're just getting there because the series has just moved in. We're about, what, 3 novels, I think, into 1637. But we've just started getting into it. And the book I wrote, the last one I wrote in the main line, which is 1637, The Polish Maelstrom, ends right about then. So that's new. That's just coming up. One thing that makes life tricky as a writer, which I discovered after I wrote 1632. I never intended 1632 to be the beginning of the series. It was written to be a standalone novel. And I only later decided to turn it into a series because Jim Bain, well, a lot of fans did, but more importantly, in the immediate sense, Jim Bain pushed me to do it and waved what was then quite a bit of money under my nose to do it. And that was what enabled me to start writing full time. So I gave serious thought to how I would turn this thing into a series. And we have a series that came out of it. But here's the problem I was left with, which I had created for myself, which was in 1632, I launched 4 romances. There are 4 romances in that book. One romance is between 2 people in late middle age, or both in their mid-late 50s. The others are 3 young couples, and I had all 3 of those young ladies pregnant by the end of the novel, which seemed like, very nice and symbolic, and all that. And yeah, for a standalone novel, that's fine. But now you've got a series on your hands in which all 3 of them are prominent heroines, and 2 of the 3 are action figures, and they've all got babies. And this is awkward, They managed to figure out ways.
It's awkward, but Eric, it's awkward, but it's also given the series considerably more verisimilitude than the Great.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Because they have to deal with the real world.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And one of the things I've found, which I tell, we have a lot of new writers that come up through the 1632 series, and they often get frustrated because from a very, very long time ago, we instituted an ironclad policy, which is that if you want to write a character who's an American character, an uptimer, you have to select someone from what we call the grid. And the grid was developed by Virginia, who has a great deal of experience and expertise in genealogy. And many years ago, when we first started this writing, I complained to her that people were submitting stories to be published. And I said, it's amazing how a small rural mining community of 3,500 people has so many retired Navy SEALs in it.
Yeah,
so many unattached young men between the ages of 20 and 21, so many rocket engineers,
No.
Yeah, one guy submitted a story where FBI agents were in pursuit of 3 arch criminals who happened to be passing through when the ring of fire happened.
Yeah.
Another person had a story where a flight of X-16s, who would never fly that low in that part of the United States, were flying right above the. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
So, anyway, Virginia said, I could create a town for you based on the real data of the area using this program that a friend of hers had devised for her. So I said, please. So she did. And Virginia produced for her. She had to rework manually the characters we'd already created. But basically, she fed into the program the data from Marion County in the year 2000. And it generated a town of 3,500 people with their names, family associations, ages, level of education, religious affiliation, military service, if any, occupation. So it gave us a whole town. And the rule ever since then is if you want to write an American character, you've got to find somebody on the grid you can use. You can't just invent somebody. And quite a few new writers complain about it. And what I tell them is, trust me on this, your story will be better if you have to use a character who doesn't perfectly fit the role. Because if the character is tailor-made, designed by you to do what you need in the plot, it's not going to be as interesting a character as one where, you know, there's rough edges and things that don't fit right and you got to turn around. And it's true. It really is how it works writing. And you're right, Virginia, having, you know, Rebecca and Gretchen and Julie Sims all with, well, Gretchen already had several kids, but, you know, with new babies, yeah, it makes you have to think of how you're going to do this and still enable to get the story you want out of it. So yes, I can understand that abstractly, but once again, if I'm going to do anything with Tom Stone, I'm going to have to figure out, okay, how old is Tom by now? He's got to be mid-50s by now.
Mid-50s at the very least.
Yeah, he might even be getting close.
We have to decide how long he's going to live.
Right. Yeah.
Now, bearing in mind, you've got people like, let's take a very famous person who I just saw on the Democratic feed for Wisconsin doing the table read, Norman Lear, who at 93 is spry, still doing pretty much what he did back in the days of when he was producing things like Princess Bride, still doing that, still sharp.
Yeah, no, it's, yeah.
So we have, but we have to decide: is that how we want him to end up, as being still sharp at 93, which would give him another 40 years to be an active participant, or do we want to create a tragedy and have him die of a heart attack at 60?
You know, I've got to tell you, Misty, Andrew, I think it was you and I. It was either you and I or Chuck and me, but I think it was you and I fielded the idea at one point of killing off Rui Sanchez. Was that us, wasn't it? I think it was. I can't remember.
I think we decided in the end he was going to survive.
Yeah, well, what happened was we ran that idea past. There's an inner circle of about 20, depending on what we're working on at any one time, anywhere 15 to 30 people who we bring into the discussions of a novel and who read chapters as they're writing and so on and so forth. So we ran that idea by him. And there was a universal outcry. And Virginia, as I recall, you were leading it, saying, no, you will not kill off Rui Sanchez.
No, you have
You have a feeling
character, and he is in good physical shape. Now
yes.
Karen has presupposed that Magdalena is making Tom eat better and exercise more than he was inclined to do.
His inclination is to be lazy, but being as he was on that commune for as long as he was, and was basically growing marijuana without the benefit of high intensity lighting and automatic watering systems, is hard physical manual labor. So he is not unaccustomed to that.
No. Basically, I think he's in pretty good shape. You don't have to give him a heart attack.
Okay.
No. I'm not. Look, I tend to be really. I don't know what the word is. I don't want to use unprincipled because that's not really fair to me. But the story always comes first. So you know what's going to make the best story. And if somebody dropping dead of a heart attack would make the best story, fine. But usually that's not true. Occasionally it is. But the thing is, I've got to figure out what is going to happen with Tom, or else we'll just have to leave him where he is. But I don't know yet. It depends on, the problem is I haven't worked in Italy for figuratively speaking. I actually work here where I'm sitting, which is in a basement in Indiana. But I haven't given enough thought yet to where I'm going to go with what happens next in Italy because I've been preoccupied with other things and will be for at least a couple more years. So the two
Well,
characters in this,
let me drop an earworm,
yeah,
which has been which is what has been going through my mind ever since you talked about all these children, these babies that are popping up everywhere,
yeah,
especially in the Stone family. I think I remember a quote that is something to the effect of, "Your children are your hostages to fortune."
yes, they are,
Mhm.
they are, and
So
yes,
that
it
might be your theme.
yeah, yeah. Now it is very true that people get a lot less adventurous when it's not just their own, not necessarily lives. People aren't usually risking their lives, but their livelihoods they do risk. And all of a sudden, it's one thing to risk your own. It's another thing to risk that, of a 1 or 2 year old child who is completely dependent on you. So yes, you're right about that. I'm thinking that we will probably leave Tom and Magdalena where they are. I don't think we'll move them, but I think
Padua is a
it
pretty
more.
good Padua is a pretty good place if you want to keep people in a setting that's not being bombarded every other year
Yes.
by,
Yeah.
by siege engines.
Yeah. 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 Now, the one thing that could happen, which I'm triggered off partly because we have another panel that we'll be doing on pandemics. Virginia, you're on that one. And the point of that panel is to discuss fiction, disease, especially big disease like pandemics, as a theme or setting in fiction. What do writers and other artists do with it? And we wound up doing quite a bit with it in the 1632 series because we're in the early 17th century.
Uh,
Um, so one thing I'm thinking is it would be interesting. Yeah, you're right. There's not going to be a lot of bombarding done in Padua because, for one thing, Venice is powerful now, especially with the alliance of the USC. So not too many people are going to meddle with it. But there's no reason they can't have an epidemic coming through.
absolutely.
And at that point, Tom would be pretty much the go-to guy for just about everybody around there. That's definitely worth thinking about. I will do so. Anyway, I've been given the signal that we are almost out of time. So if anyone has any last things you'd like to say, please do so. And if not, I'll try to figure out how to wrap this up. But
I find it bemusing in the extreme that my one little story should have blossomed off into this huge octopus with its tentacles everywhere.
Now, I think the Stone family, possibly more than anything else, illustrates or exemplifies, I'm not sure it's the right word, one of the real characteristics of the 1632 series, which is the way storylines intersect and spread out and weave back in with each other. And, because they tend not to just end where they are. They tend to keep coming back and rolling back, which is what I actually hoped would happen with a series. And so far it's happened, but it's certainly happened to the Stone family. And there are other interesting character groups in the series, certainly, but I think that one is probably my favorite. Anyhow, they were certainly a ton of fun for Andrew and I working with them in Galileo Fair. Dreesen incident, that book had other things that were difficult about it, but actually I think the relationship between Ron and Missy was the one that was easiest of all of them to work through. And it was certainly a lot of fun having this young hippie guy marrying into the one of the two most prominent families of this, small town, and a small town aristocracy is not going to be much of one, but it's still an aristocracy of sorts. That was fun too. Anyhow,
It's as big an aristocracy as Monaco.
not as rich though.
Think about it. Think about it.
Well,
Grantsville is essentially the Monaco in many ways of its time period at this point.
You know, yeah.
but the truth of the matter is that Missy's father was a car dealer, which is not the equivalent of being an international banker.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, exactly. He was a car dealer, and the other the fellow on the other side, the other family, the Hudsons is a farmer. He's a very prosperous farmer in the area, but that's what he is. It's more. The problem actually isn't so much with Missy's father; it's with the grandmothers, who are the ones that really get their hackles up. As one of them puts, "I don't want this damn hippie in my family." Anyway, all right. I think we are.
The extension club to which my mother belonged when I was a child, when I developed the grandmothers.
All right.
Extension club, Andrew, is sort of the American equivalent of a women's institute.
Jam and Jerusalem.
All right. I'm getting the signal. We are out of time. Thank all of you for coming, and I hope our people watching this have enjoyed the panel. And thanks again.